Hello, everybody. One second. One second, just making sure. Okay. Um, Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Jessica Freedman. I just want to make sure that we are all set. Okay, so we should be all set on all of our channels at this point. All right. It's great to see everybody. I hope you all had a terrific spring break. I wasn't here for a couple of weeks, and that is because of spring break. And I knew everyone was away, and I was actually away too. So I hope that you all had a wonderful vacation, a wonderful time studying, working, whatever you were doing. I hope it was terrific. Okay, hold on. I just want to get to our Facebook questions, and then we will go ahead and get started. For those of you who are here with us for the first time, I just want to introduce myself. Okay, hold on a minute. All right, here we go. There are the questions. Okay, so my name is Dr. Jessica Freedman. I am the chair and founder of MedEdit's Medical Admissions. I am an emergency physician, and I have practiced in all different kinds of settings. I was on faculty at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mouth Sinai, where I was on the Medical School Admissions Committee, as well as in the residency leadership for emergency medicine. I ran medical student courses. I then moved on to the community, where I worked in the community here on the East Coast. And I founded MedEdits, 16 years ago now. And I have been working with students, all different types of students who are pre-med, going to medical school, trying to get into residency, fellowship. And, the great thing about MedEdits is that we are able to work with students throughout their entire medical education. So we work with them during medical school. We then help them get into residency. We then, if they're going to fellowship, we help them get into fellowship. So we love that aspect of what we do, because we're really able to see our students grow and mature and flourish in their careers. And it's just a beautiful thing. And we still keep in touch with a lot of our students, some of whom, now have families, and, it's really quite something. So the way that these Q&As work, for those of you who have not been here before, I try to answer as many questions as I possibly can. I initially go to our Facebook group. For those of you who are not aware, I have a private Facebook group. It is completely free, so I encourage you to join the Facebook group. And on the day of the Q&As, I ask people to post their questions, and that way I try and answer those questions, as everyone is arriving. And then, of course, if you have questions, wherever you are watching this from, you can post it into the chat, and I will see it. And I will then highlight that question so that everyone can see what that question is. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's get started. So this is an interesting question. And my daughter is an international student, but she is studying in the US, in medical school in the United States. Is she an IMG? Now, she's not an IMG because she graduated, or she will graduate from a US medical school. Depending on what her visa status is, there could potentially be some issues when she matches. So we would want to know what her visa status was. And I would recommend, if she was accepted to a medical school that took international students, then that medical school has dealt with this before. And so I would advise her to go speak with whomever her dean is, or with whomever her advisor is. If she knows what her specialty choice is, she can talk to that person, but they probably won't know the answers. You're better off speaking with someone who is in the medical school leadership, and they'll be able to help her, figure out, what this will do for her in terms of her visa status, depending on what that is. Okay, here's another one. I'm just going to copy and paste this again so all of you can see it. Okay. Here we go. All right. Does unpaid clinical experience count as clinical experience? Something like working in a doctor's office doing triage and helping the doctor with ultrasounds, um, but there isn't a paycheck. So you don't need to get a paycheck for something to be considered clinical experience. There are different categories in AMCAS, and so as long as the student is taking care of patients and they're involved with the patient care team, they're doing things like triaging, they're doing what you're describing here in terms of helping the doctor with ultrasound. They're probably learning about ultrasound depending on the specialty. And that most certainly counts as clinical experience. So don't worry if it's paid or if it's not paid. That isn't going to matter. Okay, let's see. Okay, does getting paid at my dad's office for the above, does that have any weight in the application? I guess because it's a family business. This is an interesting question. We certainly work with a lot of physicians' children's here at MedEdits. I think it's because we have such a strong background in medicine that we definitely work with a lot of children of physicians. And it is okay if you are working in a parent's office. Does that show a little bit of privilege, which is something certainly in the college admissions process that is not something that is really, looked favorably upon? Yes, it does, but it also shows you're a worker. And I think that taking advantage of your opportunities, if you're doing the work, you're doing the work. Ideally, it would be great if you could potentially have a supervisor who is not your father, maybe a nurse, maybe a physician assistant, maybe another physician in the office. That might be the, sort of the way around this, that it won't sort of look like you're just sort of going to work with your father. That might be a good way to, sort of figure out how to make that look better, so to speak. All right, if you have any questions, just post them from wherever you are. All right, here's another good one. We get a lot of questions like this. So is it better to do a CNA or EMT certification as a college student, considering things like class schedule, being able to work at this type of job part-time while in school, etc.? Can CNAs work in medical offices or just hospitals or both? Do med schools prefer seeing one or the other? Also, if you certify in one state, is it easy or hard to get certified or approved in another state? I don't know about the certification question. This is something that I would advise you to call a couple of the states in question and ask them that. But as far as which is preferred, really, medical schools don't necessarily prefer one type of clinical work over another, in the same way that they don't really prefer one type of research work over another type of research work. The way that I really encourage you to think about this, and the way that we encourage our students to think about this, is what are your interests? Which of these experiences are going to allow you to pursue your interests in a more authentic way? So, for example, someone who is interested in emergency medicine, someone who is interested in pre-hospital care, somebody who is very involved in the community, might be better off working as an EMT, because as an EMT, you're working with emergencies. You're gaining an understanding of what the challenges of your surrounding community. You are probably getting a more in-depth understanding of challenges facing people within that community, issues related to preventive care, public health, things of that nature. So, it really, the way that you should select any of your activities shouldn't be based on what you think medical schools might want to see more than, one thing versus another thing. It should be based on what your interests are and which of these experiences allows you to more authentically pursue your own interests. Because this is all about everything that we do with our students. We're trying to help them really build a narrative and really, for lack of a better word, build a niche or build something, sort of, this is what I've really delved into, as a pre-medical student. And this is how I've delved into that, through these various experiences. So it shows your expertise at that phase of your education. That's what we're trying to do. Okay. What is the minimum GPA for the post-bac for a good chance of getting into medical school with the undergrad GPA? Will the undergrad GPA still count? So your undergraduate GPA will still count. There is no question. The post-bac GPA, as that's your more recent GPA, that's going to be more important because that's your more recent coursework. It doesn't completely negate the undergraduate GPA, but it certainly becomes, kind of more of the centerpiece of your application. We don't like giving sort of minimum GPAs that people should achieve. If I had to, sort of come up with a number, the number that I've been, that I throw out is about 3.6. I'd say it used to be 3.5, but we've bumped that up a little bit as there's been more grade inflation and, as sort of numbers have been creeping up a little bit higher. But we're looking at a lot of different factors here when we're making those recommendations. We're looking at your grade trends and sort of how those grade trends have been. So did you, let's say, have a really bad freshman year, and then because you had something going on, and then all of a sudden sophomore year, you leaped up and you kept going up? Or, did you do really badly freshman year, a little bit better sophomore year, a little bit better junior year, and then even better your senior year? So we're looking at sort of what the grade trends are. Something else we're looking at, and this is just a fact of life, of medical school admissions life, we're looking at your ethnicity. We're looking at your background. We're looking at any of the challenges that you've had. Distance traveled is sort of a phrase that medical schools like to use, because all of that is factored into how you are evaluated as a medical school applicant. So the GPA that we might want to see for one student might be different than what it might be for another student. So again, there are a lot of subtleties that we think about when we're making these recommendations. Okay, let me see. Okay. My son is having difficulty obtaining one of the letters of recommendation, science letter of recommendation. He will have a second gap year, and the science professor has not replied regarding the willingness to write a letter. He is missing only one science letter of recommendation. What should he do? My son is really stressed out. I'm so sorry. That does sound so stressful. Okay, so my question in this instance would be, how many science letters does he have? Does he have only one other science letter? Does he have other letters of recommendation? So if he's been doing a gap year, what has he been doing? Has he been working in research? Is that going to be sort of a science letter, even though it's not a science professor letter? what are other letters of recommendation that he can have? Who are the other professors from undergrad who's he's still in touch with, who might be willing to write him a letter of recommendation? This does become an issue when students go to larger schools and people move on. Professors are not necessarily invested and they don't respond. It's a very, very stressful situation. And we would really want to know what his other letter writer options are and who are those letter writers, and then what he might need to do, or what, let's say, an advisor might need to do, is call the medical schools, that are requiring 2 science letters, and ask and explain to them what the situation was. For those of you who are younger and just starting out and you're earlier in the process, this is why we ideally like students to request those letters of recommendation as soon as the relationship with the professor is over. So as soon as you have an idea, this is the professor that I want to be asking for a letter of recommendation when I apply to medical school, we advise you to do that as soon as you realize that. Now, some people say that letters have to be dated. They have to have the current date on them. They have to be, May of 2024. But the reality is that if your relationship with that person is over, whatever work you have done with them is through, then you can get that letter of recommendation from them at that point, because their assessment of you and what they're going to say is not going to change, in a year or even 2 years, right? And then that also sort of will save you from this type of situation. Now, if you wanted to try to get an updated letter, you could then try to reach out to the professor. I'm applying to medical school, in 2 months. This is what I've been up to. You try to keep in touch with that person in the interim. Don't let them forget you. If their email address switches, if they switch, undergraduate universities, you don't lose track of them. They don't lose track of you. And keeping those lines of communication open will then allow you to potentially ask that person for an updated letter of recommendation. But as soon as you know who's writing your letters, you ask for those letters. If your school holds the letters for you, then that's great. If the school doesn't hold the letters for you, then you create an Interfolio account and you have the professor upload those letters to the Interfolio account. They're safe and sound there until you're ready to apply. Okay. Good question here. All right. When is the school deadline for everything to be submitted to medical schools? Getting conflicting information. Okay. So first of all, deadlines are not actually deadlines. When we use the term deadlines, the deadlines you're going to find online are not actually deadlines. The deadline for us, for you to submit your primary application, ideally, we want that submitted by the end of June. Okay. Do we have people who submit their applications in July and they get into medical school? Yes, absolutely, we do. But we find it's a much less stressful process if you get the application submitted early. That then sort of gets the ball rolling. Applications, this is for AMCAS, for the allopathic MD granting system. Those applications are first transmitted to medical schools at the end of June. And then at that point, they start sending out secondary applications. Now, as far as secondary applications, you're going to read online a lot of places that you have to submit all of your secondaries within 2 weeks of receipt. This is not true. Please, I just want to bust that myth. If a school tells you they want the secondary back in 2 weeks, then by all means, you must send it back within 2 weeks. But for the majority of medical schools, they're not going to have a deadline for you. And we would rather you take a little time, because all those secondaries are going to flood your inbox all at once and you're going to be overwhelmed. So you need to get ready for that. And we would rather that you submit quality secondary essays and take, let's say 3 weeks potentially even to get those in, depending on how many schools you're applying to. And then there's also a strategy for in what order you're completing those secondary applications. We ideally like all secondaries to be submitted by the end of August, when you start submitting your secondaries in September, October, then you're a really late applicant. And at that point, we even question if you should be sending in your secondary essays because you're so late. So summer is a time to work on secondary essays. Some students pre-write secondary essays. So they look up last year's prompts and they start working on secondaries now. I am working with students on secondary essays right now, along with their primary applications, because there are a lot of students who just want to have those essays ready to go. So as soon as they get those secondary applications, they're just shooting off that secondary application with zero delay. There is always a risk when you pre-write your secondary essays that a prompt will change. It doesn't happen very often, but just know it's a bit of a risk. So you potentially have to go back and, and redo those secondary essays. Just keep that in mind. Okay, do med school admissions care about social media profiles or LinkedIn? I'd say overall, no. People don't have time. So for most people, the most recent admissions process that they went through was college. When you're going through the college admissions process, you know that there are people who are employed by the college only to do admissions. That's at a leadership level, that's, at the reading level for applications. When you're dealing with medical school admissions, there may be one or two people who are employed specifically for medical school admissions for that medical school, but otherwise the people who are reading your application are physicians, they're students, they are other people who work in the medical school, in the student affairs office, they're PhDs. So when you work in academic medicine, and I can tell you this because I worked in academic medicine for a while, when you work in academic medicine, you have numerous responsibilities. If you're a physician in academic medicine, like I was, you are taking care of patients, you are working clinically, you are on committees. Those can be medical school committees, those can be hospital committees, that can be the admissions committee, that can be the residency committee, but we are on a lot of different committees in academics, okay? You potentially are teaching students, you're teaching residents, you are, giving courses. They're all different things. Potentially, depending on what kind of academician you are, you're also doing research. I did not do research. So when you are an academic physician, you have many, many roles and responsibilities. And the admissions piece of that, for those who choose to be on that side of things, because they just love working with students, they love working with applicants, that's just one part of their day. They don't have time to look up your Facebook, to look up your LinkedIn. They're going to trust what you have put in that application. The application is going to be the most comprehensive profile that you're going to have. LinkedIn is very cursory relative to the application. Okay, let's answer Regina's question here. How much research experience is our medical schools looking for? Where could students look for these opportunities? So again, when we talk about how much experience medical schools want, first of all, it depends on the medical school. Osteopathic medical schools are looking for less research experience than allopathic medical schools. The most selective allopathic medical schools are definitely looking for research experience. And our students who are getting into the top allopathic medical schools, and I always clarify when I say that, any US medical school is a fantastic medical school and can get you where you want to go. But if you are aiming for one of those top schools, all of our students who are getting into those schools have research experience, and many of them have extensive research experience. So again, I don't like to quantify this. I can tell you that we have students who are successful in the process who have 500 hours of experience. We have students who are successful in the process who literally have thousands of hours of research experience, and maybe 1,000 in one lab and then 1,000 in another, or several thousand all in one place. So there is huge variation in this. Sometimes students think, and especially when they're applying at the end of junior year, because when you're applying at the end of junior year, you're packing everything into a very short amount of time, 3 years. You're getting in all of your coursework, you're getting in your MCAT, you're getting in all of your experiences. And sometimes those students will say, well, I did neuroscience research. I have 350 hours of neuroscience research. And that really isn't very much compared to what other applicants have, right? But juniors, people who apply at the end of junior year, also tend to have fewer hours in general of all of their experiences. So we look at this holistically, just like medical schools look at it. We look at the full candidacy, and that's how we determine that, combined with what you want to do and where you want to get to. That's how we're making this decision of what you need. Okay, so that's why there isn't sort of everyone. It's so easy if we can just say you need 850 hours of research experience and you're going to be competitive, but that just isn't the case. Okay. My daughter went through the Baylor BSMD interview process. She is waiting for final decisions. Do you have any information regarding the program matching? Baylor's fantastic. So if you're interviewed for the Baylor BSMD program, congratulations. That is a huge accomplishment. And I can tell you Baylor has fantastic matches. They are one of the best medical schools in Texas. And whether or not you want to stay in Texas, or whether you're interested in, whether she's interested in ultimately going somewhere else for her residency, that's many years ahead. She doesn't be thinking about that yet. Certainly they're going to be able to, to position her very, very well for whatever specialty she wants to pursue, and in whatever geographic area. They have fantastic matches, fantastic medical school. Okay. For those taking a gap year, can additional experiences be submitted later? Absolutely, Regina. This is a great question. So for students who are doing gap years, or for students, let's say, you're submitting your application in May. First of all, you're able to put anticipated hours on the application. That's really important. It's a relatively new feature on AMCAS that we love because we hated the fact that students sort of weren't getting credit for whatever they were doing in the upcoming year while they were applying. And what you do during that year is vitally important. Okay, this is something that you can communicate to medical schools during interviews. We are also very proactive with our students in having them send update letters and communicating with admissions committees when they have significant accomplishments. This can also be extremely helpful when you are in the waitlist, season. So we aren't yet quite there, but I can tell you, when you're writing letters of intent, when you have significant updates to include in that letter of intent, we, really help our students to write some very, very powerful letters of intent. And that most certainly, I can tell you, moves the needle. So this is why we really encourage our students to just stay the course during that application year. You don't want to say, oh, I'm submitted, I'm done, I'm just going to, hang back, I'm just going to wait and see what happens. I'll go to work, but I don't really need to try that hard. You need to be super proactive during that year, because what you accomplish during that year is most certainly going to be influential later in the process, potentially, if you don't get into the med school you want to get into right away. Good questions tonight. Okay. Can the personal statement be a real incident that happened to parents during her elementary school time, and that gradually inspired and developed her passion for med school? Absolutely. So a personal statement is personal. That's number one. The personal statement needs to explain and offer evidence for why the student is interested in medicine. So whichever experiences are the most influential on that path, that's what the student needs to write about. So if there was something really pivotal that happened to a student when they were young that served as sort of this initial inspiration for this interest in medicine, most definitely that experience can be included in the personal statement. When things are sort of, from the past, the student's past, we don't want them to spend too much space on that experience, but it's important to mention everything that was crucial in that student's, overall journey to medical school. Absolutely. If you have not planned on MCAT retake and applied this cycle and then decide to retake later after applying, can you send the updated scores? Okay, this becomes a little bit complicated because depending on when the retake is, if it's on the application and the medical schools think that you have a pending score that is coming, they may wait to review your application. Now, we've actually, no, maybe we have had a student do this, but sometimes, and I think logistically and sort of psychologically, this is a really hard thing to kind of wrap your head around, which is why I think probably we haven't had students who have done this. But I suppose that if you applied this year and you think that one of your potential weaknesses is your MCAT score, and then let's say you're going through the application year and you're not getting any interviews, you're not getting any acceptances, and you retake it, let's say in January or something, then I suppose you could update your medical schools. But if you haven't received interviews yet, it would be very, very late for that to potentially move the needle. But it's an interesting question. I would say that probably if you think the MCAT isn't strong enough to get accepted this year, then probably the best bet is to put all of your apples into restudying for that MCAT and then waiting until next year to apply. It's a good question, though, not a common question. If you have 1,000 to 2,000 hours of research in undergrad and summer and some clinical experience versus more research with a gap year, if you are able to do more in undergrad without a gap year, does that count positively? Absolutely. So, we're just amazed by our students every day, honestly, in terms of what they're able to accomplish. And I am just in awe of some of our students who are able to, do incredibly well in terms of, just in their classwork, take their MCAT, do on the MCAT, and then at the same time, get 1,000 to, thousands of hours of research while they're in college. So yeah, this of course is looked upon very, very favorably, not only because, you're able to do all this stuff, all at once, but, hopefully the research you're doing is important and valuable to you and, helps you to kind of really develop that expertise. Can epidemiology classes count towards BCPM GPA? I would need to look that up, or you could ask your registrar how that course is categorized. My gut feeling is that is not going to be a BCPM class, but I would need to look that up. Do neuro classes count towards BCPM GPA? Yes. For those of you who don't know what BCPM GPA is, it's your biology, chemistry, math, physics GPA. So it's basically like your STEM GPA. And medical schools, when they're looking at your GPA, they're dividing it into several categories. One is your BCPM, then it's all of your other non-BCM classes, and then it's your overall GPA. And the BCPM GPA for medical school admissions committee is very, very important. That's why we pay a lot of focus. We pay a lot of attention to that GPA. Okay. What are the chances of getting into medical school with an MCAT of 505 and a GPA of a 3.93? So the GPA is outstanding here. The reason the MCAT becomes very, very important is because it is the only way to compare applicants in the same way. So it's the only way to compare apples to apples. And this is why in medical school admissions, the MCAT is super important. I can tell you that this year, we have had students who have been accepted to medical school, U.S. allopathic MD granting medical schools with 505s. but there have been always some type of other circumstances surrounding that student's profile. Okay. So when we're making this recommendation, if we think that you can potentially, I'm going to tell you it's tough to get in no matter who you are with a 505, but if there's any possibility, we are going to look at other aspects of your candidacy and tell you if we think that is at all possible. For most students, okay, we are going to tell them that with a 505 and a 3.93 GPA, they should be looking at osteopathic medical schools. But again, we have had students, every year we have students, this year included, who get into allopathic med schools with that GPA, but we still have those students applying to osteopathic med schools as a backup. So there are going to be a lot of different factors we're going to look at to tell you if we think that is even a remote possibility for you. Is there any advantage to med school admission for being a neuroscience major and a 3.2 GPA would be okay to apply with a 515 MCAT score? So a 3.2 GPA and a 515 MCAT. It's interesting because that's a mismatch. That's kind of what we call mismatch. A 3.2 GPA, usually a 515 MCAT is, matching, so to speak, with a 3.7 or higher. So this would make me wonder why the student had the 3.2. It would make me concerned. We would want to look at where the student went to college. Where did they have difficulty in terms of their GPA? This could be an applicant who is an excellent candidate for something called a special master's program, different than a post-bac. A post-bac is generally speaking for students who have taken either no medical school prerequisites or maybe one or two medical school prerequisites. A special master's program is a program specifically designed for students who want to go to medical school, who need academic enhancement. And I can tell you those programs, definitely students are successful after enrolling in those programs. So, we would want to see the whole profile, but it could cause an issue having a 3.2 GPA. But to get a 515 MCAT, it would make me think that there was something else going on during undergrad that led that student to have a 3.2. Do you recommend retaking the MCAT during a gap year in the hopes of improving the score? Again, it depends on when you're applying to med school, when you plan on taking the MCAT. Generally speaking, this is not something that we recommend, retaking the MCAT during the gap year. I would say that probably thinking this through more, because someone else asked a similar question. I would say that maybe, let's say, if you're thinking the MCAT might be the reason why the student didn't get into med school or was having, not such great results in terms of getting interviews, possibly, let's say in January after the new year, which is sort of always, annually like a key date for us. If we have students at that point who don't yet have interviews, we're getting really aggressive in terms of figuring out, okay, what can we do to get you interviews? Why didn't you get interviews? And at that point, if we really felt that it was the MCAT score that was holding the student back, then we might say, okay, are you ready to dive into the MCAT again and retake it in 3 months? Because you only want to take the MCAT when you've really had the time to prepare. And each time you take the MCAT, you have to re-prepare. You can't just sort of wing it. So we would want, to say, okay, if it's January now, January, February, March, do you think you'd be ready? You have the time to devote to be able to retake that test in April or May and submit a reapplication. So, okay. So this was a student with a 3.2 GPA and a 515 MCAT sophomore year, had health issues, and the GPA went down. See, there's the reason. So if there's a real reason why the student's GPA plummeted, right? And we sort of call this a line in the sand. It's what I call it. When there's a line in the sand, freshman year, the student had a 3.9, sophomore year, the student had, a 2.8, and then junior year, they had a 3.9 again. There are two lines in the sand. Something happened that year. And so here's your explanation. And then they came through with a 515 MCAT. then that clearly tells me that, the GP, this 1 year is the outlier. This is why looking at patterns is so important. And this is what good admissions committee reviewers, that's what they do. They look at patterns. Okay. Is there an advantage of doing an honors undergrad major when considering med school admissions? Not necessarily. Honors undergraduate colleges, I think, are fantastic opportunities because I think honors colleges, which I think is what you're referring to, honors colleges, offer amazing opportunities for students. Often they have, research opportunities that maybe other students don't have. Sometimes they're going to be able to register for classes early. So depending on what those opportunities are that the honors college student has that they wouldn't have if they were in the traditional college, that can offer an advantage. But being in the honors college alone is not necessarily going to be a huge advantage when applying for medical school admission. They're still going to be looking at all of your coursework and all of your grades, and your entire profile, and they're going to be making a decision, based on your entire profile. So it won't necessarily offer an advantage just being in the honors college. Okay, let me just go ahead and answer this one. Okay. My daughter has 3 MD acceptances and she is trying to choose the school best suited for her. What should be the top 3 priorities in making the selection? How common is it to have any outside scholarship? She is not qualified for any merit, for any need-based awards. So outside scholarships are tough. There aren't many of them. There are some for underrepresented minorities. Those are more common. In terms of making a decision about those 3 schools, first of all, you want to look at location. Geography is super important. You want to look at the affiliated hospitals with that medical school. Where are those affiliated hospitals, those major medical centers? Where is she going to be doing her rotations? You want to be looking at the curriculum and sort of, what is the emphasis? Is it small group learning? Is it lecture-based learning? Does the curriculum and does the teaching style, does the learning style, does that match with your daughter's learning style? Does that resonate with her? And, and then you also want to look at match lists. So, sometimes it's tough if you don't know what a good match list is. It's tough to really evaluate those critically, but you want to look at the match list and get a sense of, where are students matching? Are they getting the matches that they want? Are they getting competitive matches? Because ultimately you're going to medical school to get an education and to move on to the next phase of your career. So you want to be at a school where you're going to, have a good chance of matching into the specialty you want and at the program that you want. And then finally, go to revisit days. Medical schools, as many of you know, are not like colleges. They don't offer tours. They're really not very welcoming of people just kind of dropping in and, checking out the school. So you want to use those revisit days as an opportunity to meet students, to go on tours, to get, sort of the overall vibe of the medical school. And that's usually when students, if they are in the very fortunate position of having 3 acceptances, that's when they really know where they want to go, if it's not clear. Is neuroscience major, chem minor, and Spanish minor at NYU pre-health considered good on the application? Again, any major can be a good major. It's about what your student does with that major, how they pursue their interests, and, how they're showing evidence for their interest in that major outside of just their coursework. So for example, for a student, let's say, who was a neuroscience major and a Spanish minor, is that student doing some type of, work in the community? They're at NYU, right? They're surrounded by, they have Bellevue there. You have a lot of underserved communities there. Are they working as an interpreter? Are they working in the community? Are they working in a neuroscience or let's say a neurology office helping to interpret for Spanish speaking patients. So how are they combining these interests, and how are they illustrating and offering evidence for these interests outside of their academic work? So it isn't so much that, like, getting 2 or 3 minors, in addition to your major, that isn't really what is impressive. What's impressive is what you do with your interests. So for example, I would rather that a student just major in neuroscience, and if they have an interest in Spanish, take upper level Spanish classes. Doesn't really matter if you earn the minor or not, because that's just a function of getting enough credits, right? And then do something with that Spanish minor. I mean, you're the students in New York City, so there's plenty of opportunity to be working with underserved communities, immigrant populations, using their fluency in Spanish to help other people. It can be within medicine or not within medicine. So that would be my recommendation. Okay. I think that I got to most of the questions. Let me just see. Okay. Let me see. Someone asked, does it matter where you have an EMT certification done? It doesn't matter. No one's going to care where it's done. Okay. This is actually a good question. I'm going to answer this one, and then I think we'll be done at this point. Okay. How strict are med schools with pre-med prereqs? Is there an official place on the application to indicate that you have taken all the prereqs, or is it more of a strong recommendation? For example, I've taken 2 quarters of English, but some schools like to see 1 full year. How strict would schools be when reviewing this on the application? This is a fantastic question. It is something that we talk about a lot. This is the reason why I am not an advocate of taking those AP credits for your basic science prerequisites, because a lot of med schools require them. When it comes to English, certainly there are some schools that are going to give you a little bit of wiggle room in terms of being very, very firm about those requirements. There's nothing on the application itself where you sort of like check boxes, because each medical school has its own requirements. So the best resource, and I might be able to just find this for you. Hold on, let me, you know what? After the live, I will post it. But if you, the MSAR, the medical school admissions requirements, that is where you're going to be able to find all of the prerequisites that are required for the medical schools. And that's the most up-to-date resource. And what I advise you to do is, for the schools that you are interested in or potentially interested in that require a full year of English, I recommend that you call those medical schools and ask them how firm that requirement is. The other thing to keep in mind is that you are required to fulfill those prerequisites before you matriculate. So if you end up applying to medical schools that have requirements that you haven't yet taken, you can take them during the application year itself. As long as you've taken those classes before you start medical school, you're going to be fine. So we got some great questions tonight, and I thank you all so much for being here. It was great to see you. I've missed all of you the past couple weeks. Something that I'm thinking of doing, that I'm going to start doing potentially, is doing theme-based presentations, so that, we can, kind of really dive into some topics, that I know that all of you are curious about and interested in. So if you have any suggestions of, I don't like thinking of them as lectures. I like thinking of them as more sort of like working sessions, because I'll have some materials that hopefully will be useful for everybody. So if there are any topics that are especially interesting to you, or that you'd like to hear about, please post them in the Facebook group. I'd love to hear from you. Of course, if you're applying to med school this year, I know what you're curious about, and I know what questions you have. If you're interested in working with us, we are actively working with our students now who are applying this spring. So please reach out. This is the time to get started. of course, you can always rush it and start working with us in May. But we love it when we have a little bit of extra time to help you, put forth the absolute best documents that you can and the best application that you can. So thank you all so much for being here. I will see you next week, same time, same place. And in the meantime, during the week, I hope to see you in the Facebook group. So please post any questions you have there. Okay. Have a great night. Bye-bye.